Good morning, everyone. So we're here to talk about vegetables and in particular how to grow water-wise vegetables here in New Mexico. Now, to begin with, of course, we all know that vegetables are a very healthy component of our diet. We're all encouraged to eat more or as many as we can include on our plate. They're a critical component to our overall health. They provide many essential vitamins and minerals. But of course, the reason vegetables are low in calories in general is because they are mostly water. And, going with their water component, they also will require irrigation. Here in the desert Southwest, irrigation is going to be essential for almost any type of vegetable you would want to grow. Now, I want to talk about three different approaches to creating a water-wise vegetable garden. Those include number one, modifying the environmental conditions around the area where your vegetable garden is to minimize water loss to evaporation and leaching. We can also manage the growth of some vegetables, particularly those that are very deep rooted, so that they are more drought tolerant and can mine irrigation from deeper in the soil. And finally, there are a few vegetables that actually require less water to grow. So if you really want to just apply less water and still get a good vegetable crop, I'm going to discuss some of the selections that you can consider. So first of all, modifying the environment. Now, we probably most of us know about the transpiration of the way the plants will take up water from the soil through their roots. The water comes up through the plants and then is expelled through the leaves. And this water uptake actually keeps the plants turgid, and it's really critical to move vitamins and minerals, fertilizer through the plant. Now, if the plant has all the water it needs for regular function, if it's really, really hot, really windy, stressful, the plants will take up water just to stay alive. So we get to the point where they don't need the water anymore to be productive. They just need the water to survive. So we often get that condition here in the hot parts of the summer in New Mexico. So we know that the transpiration rate for vegetable plants will increase when it's very hot, if it's windy, or if we have very bright sun, very hot, harsh conditions that are very common, of course, here when we're growing our warm season vegetables. Now we know that there are drought-resistant plants, many of the xeriscape plants that are covered there in the guide that was just pointed out. Cacti, for instance, of course, we have very, very heavy outer cuticles. There's that heavy covering over the plants to protect from water loss. They can tend to have relatively small leaves, which will evaporate water off them less, dispel water off them less leaf area. And having spines or hair on the leaves will also break up the wind that comes over those plants and minimize water loss that way. So, of course, most vegetable plants are not drought tolerant in this way. We don't, usually they're more agreeable to our palate, more easy to eat. So how do we minimize transpiration in our vegetable plants that we're growing? Well, we know we get an increased transpiration rate with high air temperature, low relative humidity, wind, and bright sunlight. So we can reduce the rate. We're not wasting transpiration water by adding wind protection or shading. And for many of you who grow tomatoes, there's many, many great benefits to using shade with tomatoes, including curly top virus, that those of you who know, we get less of it in shady conditions. And this also kind of breaks down some of the great stress that are on our plants during our hot summer months or our very windy periods. We also want to control weeds. Okay, easier said than done, I know. Weeds are a continuing struggle for gardeners everywhere. A weed, of course, is just a plant growing where we don't want it to grow. But of course, when the weeds are in our vegetable garden, they're competing for the irrigation. They're competing for moisture in the soil as well as nutrients. So there's many good reasons to control weeds in our gardens. And weeds also very frequently will harbor diseases that can then affect our vegetable crops. So really important to get out there and control them. When they're very small is best. You really want to get those weeds out of your garden before they go to seed. Many ways to control them. Mechanical removal, it can be a lot of work, but it's great exercise. Mulch, and I'll talk about mulch here shortly, but that's putting organic materials on top of the soil around the vegetables. Herbicides can be used very, very carefully. And if you use a chemical herbicide, of course, be sure to follow label instructions. That is the law. And herbicides really are a last resort, and only if you can't control the weeds through other gentler methods. And of course, targeted water application. Where do weeds grow? Weeds grow where there's water. So that's why we're getting them in our gardens, because we're watering our vegetables. But definitely, you don't want to apply water to areas of the garden that you don't have vegetables or don't plan to have vegetables actively growing. So your soil texture is going to need to be taken into consideration with water-wise gardening. Here in New Mexico, we have really rough soil. So I talk to groups all the time, and I always ask, who has beautiful, deep, rich, loamy soil? And very, very few people do. And if they do, it's only because somebody built the soil or someone before them built the soil in their garden. So most people here in New Mexico have very sandy soil typically, or very heavy clay soil. So both can be challenging to manage as far as water. With sandy soils, they drain really well. Boy, they drain well. You water them, the water quickly dissipates through the soil profile. However, because of this, they hold very little water. And we also know that nutrients in the soil can leach out as that water leaches out of the soil. So in general, if you have sandy soil in your garden, you need more frequent, lighter touches to your watering. On the other end of the spectrum, we have our very heavy clay soils, and they can be even more difficult to manage than the sandy soils. They tend to have very poor drainage. When you water, the water tends to stay there. They can be filled with nutrients, but the nutrients can be actually bound up in those tight soil particles. So you may actually see nutrient deficiencies because of just that tight soil, or other issues like pH and other issues that may be going on with your soil. In general, however, if you have the heavy clay, you're going to need less frequent watering. And here's just a quick diagram that shows here in a drip irrigation scenario where in a light soil, the water is going to go straight down, and the very heavy clay soil, it's going to pool up there to the surface for some time before it dissipates. Now, we know that for water-wise vegetable gardening, the best soil is to have that well-drained, deep, rich soil that contains a lot of organic matter. So organic matter are all those organic particles in the soil that actually act as a sponge to keep moisture right there in the soil profile where the vegetable roots are actively growing. So organic matter is like, having organic matter is more like a sponge. It holds the moisture. Gravel is when you don't have organic matter. Unfortunately, here in New Mexico, our soil is very, very low in organic matter. So this is something to build really good soil for our vegetable gardens. We need to add organic matter back. And it burns off very quickly in the soil. So you really need to every season incorporate compost, manure, or some type of organic mulch. And so this is a long-term labor of love. So you can't just do this once, a big ton of compost, and then forget it. If you do this year after year, season after season, eventually your soil really increases in its health, its quality, and its ability to grow healthy vegetable plants. So compost, this isn't a composting talk, and I know many groups, many master gardener groups around the state do specific workshops on making your own compost. You can make it yourself or you can purchase it. But adding compost to your garden soil is one of the best things you can do to it. Okay, it's adding that organic matter that we're very low in. That's very, very important to maintain soil moisture in our vegetable gardens. It also helps open up heavy clay, or helps keep the moisture in that very sandy soil so it doesn't dissipate so quickly. So it's going to help either type of soil. And like I said, I won't go into how to make it. It's a bit challenging to make here in New Mexico because most of the compost we talk about is a thermal compost. That it's a microbial reaction that takes place with aerobic microorganisms and moisture. And it's so dry here, it's hard to keep our compost piles moist enough to keep that great microbial action going forward. So mulch, I briefly mentioned mulch. This is material that we place on the soil surface around our vegetable plants. Now, you want to apply this typically after your vegetable plants have established and have gotten some height to them. Don't cover your vegetable plants, okay? You want to put this around them about 2 to 4 inches. It's a good idea to water it when you first put organic mulch down just to settle it in place. But what it does is it really helps, it helps in many ways. So it conserves that soil moisture so we don't have soil just evaporating from the soil surface around the vegetable plants. It's also a great way to shade out weeds. And we already discussed here, if we get rid of the weeds, we're helping to conserve the moisture for the vegetable plants. We're helping to conserve nutrients, and this is going to help cut down on some of that manual labor and other effort we need to put into controlling the weeds. Keeping fruit off the ground. We do know fruits like tomatoes, melons, if they're ripening directly touching the soil, they can start rotting on you. There are drawbacks, though, to using organic mulch. So one is pests. So there's certain pests, squash bugs always come to mind, that having this nice layer of organic mulch in there just is a perfect harborage for them. So depending on what you're growing and what insect pests you may expect, you may or may not want to use organic mulch in your garden. It also is going to take quite a bit of time and cost to do this. And also, depending on what material you use for mulch on the soil surface, the wind can blow it. And I've had a few complaints to my office over the years where someone's neighbor's newspaper mulch blew through their yard. So very unhappy neighbors, unhappy person who put down the newspaper mulch in their garden because they lost it after going to all that trouble. So when you choose what material to use as a mulch, make sure you have a strategy for keeping it in place in your garden as well. So materials you can use, first of all, make sure the material does not have live rhizomes, live weed seed, or you're adding that back to your garden soil. But if you're making sure your material is clean, you can use dry straw, dried leaves, wood chips stay in place pretty well. Newspaper, shredded newspaper is a great mulch. It just blows, but it's cheap, it's readily available. Pecan shells or other nut shells, and of course compost. We want to add compost to our garden soil anyway, and if you're adding on the soil surface as a mulch, you're getting double bang for the buck. It's going to work its way into the soil, and you're also getting that great mulching effect on the soil surface. Now, plastic mulch is an option. If you use plastic mulch, though, number one, it's not going to be helping your soil. The organic mulches are going to break down and improve your soil quality. With plastic mulch, that's not going to happen. However, plastic mulch is excellent for providing soil moisture retention and inhibiting weed growth, typically. Most weeds will be not come up through mulch. Nutsedge is one of the examples that will come up through plastic mulch, but it does take care of a lot of the common weeds we have in our vegetable garden. Also, if you use plastic mulch, you have a disposal issue. You've got to get that out of your garden. Don't ever, ever, ever till plastic into your soil or you'll never get rid of it. So it's a disposal issue and you're not helping your soil if you choose plastic mulch. So how about some vegetable plant management tips? So, as we said, the vast majority, as I said, the vast majority of vegetable crops that we grow here in the state, we're going to need to irrigate. So if we apply the irrigation water wisely, we can really aid in drought tolerance of certain vegetables. Also keep in mind that many vegetable gardeners really overdo it with watering and apply more water than the vegetables actually need. And we often see disorders or even diseases that come in because of overly saturated soil. So be careful, don't overly water, overly love your vegetables in that way because you're not necessarily doing them any good. And to know when to water, you need to dig down to where the roots are actively growing in the vegetable plants, see what the moisture is at that point. I'm always asked about moisture sensors and other automated ways of telling when to water. We're researching a lot of that here at New Mexico State University, but for a home gardener, your sense of feel is really the best way to go about this. So just dig down to where those roots are growing, and it should not be overly dry. It should not be overly wet for long periods of time. It should just feel like a well-wrung sponge. You can also watch the plants for wilting or other signs of plant stress. In our really, really hot summer days here, sometimes plants are going to wilt no matter how well watered they are. I do a lot of work with chili growers in the state, and we always say, chilies will start to wilt in the morning if they need water, and they will always wilt in the afternoon, even if they're well watered on a very, very hot day. So it's always like watch for wilting before noon, and then it's time to water your chili field. The water requirements through the season are going to change, so be aware of that. We always know that when we first plant our seeds, when we're first trying to establish transplants, that's a real critical time to make sure we have optimal water in our soil. Otherwise, the seeds are either not going to germinate or die after they start germinating. And certainly transplants are going to quickly dry out if you don't keep those well watered while they're establishing. For most vegetables, however, when the part we eat, like the leaves on lettuce, the kernels on a cob of corn, that's when the critical watering window typically is for those crops. Fruiting vegetables, when I say fruiting vegetables, so chili is a fruit, tomato is a fruit, despite what the USDA says, but botanically they are. So we know that we need to keep fruiting vegetables such as tomatoes, chili peppers, and melons well watered when they're flowering and first setting fruit. And that's because of a very, very common and very distressing disorder known as blossom end rot. So blossom end rot, we will almost always see it in our chili fields. We get it in our tomatoes very typically, and that's that dark dead scab there at the blossom end or tip of the fruit. And this is primarily caused by a calcium deficiency when those fruit are very first forming. I mentioned transpiration earlier, how that brings up nutrients through the soil to feed the plants. Well, we have calcium in there that's essential for building good cell structure in these fruit. And so if you cut off the water, you're also cutting off the calcium supply to that actively growing area. So we know that if we drought stress our plants when they're flowering, we're very likely to end up with blossom end rotted fruit later in the season. So usually this is caused by drought stress during fruit set, but also other imbalances of nutrients can also prevent the transportation of calcium and also give us this disorder. So there's other factors at play. So encourage deep root growth. There are certain plants that we can grow in our garden that have very, very deep roots. And in that case, if you give them less frequent watering, but allow the water to slowly percolate down the soil, you're going to help basically train those roots to go deeper. The deeper, more robust the root system, the more those plants can withstand drought stress or very, very hot days. So with some vegetables, this isn't going to work. So with vegetables like onions and lettuce, very, very shallow root systems. Most of our all of our cool season vegetables really have shallow roots. However, many of our warm season vegetables, such as asparagus, squash, and tomatoes, these are all three vegetable crops that we have, particularly certain cultivars that are very, very drought tolerant. But with these vegetables, if we do this less frequent, deeper watering, we can really encourage that robust root growth that will help get them over very dry, nasty days. So in choosing your irrigation system, of course, we can use sprinkler irrigations, drip irrigation where you use a tape emitter. This is a picture of just a low pressure system, so it does not necessarily have to be a high-tech system. Soaker hoses or flood irrigation, which we still some crops. I've seen gardeners use all of these different techniques. What I will say is that sprinklers and flood irrigation are least efficient. We're more likely to lose water to either leaching, evaporation. Drip irrigation and soaker hoses are putting that water exactly at the root zone, so it's the most efficient way to water our gardens. And of course, water at night to minimize evaporation, because if the irrigation water is not being taken up by the roots and just being evaporated, that's cutting down on the water use efficiency of your vegetable garden. Now, check your soil moisture regularly. In general, you want to irrigate when the very top layer of that soil, 2 to 4 inches down, is getting dried. You can automate this with controllers, but certainly you need to get out there yourself and really see and feel what's going on with the moisture status in your soil. Keep in mind that 1 inch of water in a 1 by 1 foot space is a little over a half of a gallon. And I'm always asked, well, how much How much do I irrigate my vegetables? So remember, it depends how big are the vegetables. If they're very small seedlings, they need less water. Is it very very large, very packed in vegetable garden? You may need to add more irrigation water, but in general, so this is a big generality, vegetables typically need 1 inch of irrigation water uh, weekly. So that's usually about 1/3 of an inch every other day, approximately, during peak time of our vegetable garden production. Mentioned this earlier, I'll say it again. Avoid applying water to soil that is not in the vicinity of your vegetable plant roots, because you're going to encourage weeds and it's not doing the vegetable plants any good. I say this because I frequently seen gardeners when they're starting their new garden, they just flood a real big area. And I always think, I'm going to come back here in 2 weeks and this is going to be a weed pasture. So try to prevent encouraging those weeds by watering in areas that the vegetable plants don't need that water. Okay, finally, so let's talk a little bit about some vegetables that really are drought-tolerant selections for our New Mexico water-wise gardens. Now, going to this first, so there's different ways to look at water use efficiency. So certainly we have some drought-tolerant vegetables, but another thing to keep in mind is the overall consumptive water use. So this was taken from the University of Arizona. They did a lot of work years ago, and how much do the vegetables actually take up and use? And we do know that, it's a bit common sense, but they certainly show this through their work, that if we plant quick maturing vegetables that are in our garden or in our field less time, that's going to take less water. So we get our crop very quickly. This reduces the amount of time we're actually applying water to our garden. And so in this vein, I'm going to talk about the bush vegetables, or determinate versus binding or indeterminate vegetable selections. So a determinate vegetable plant, is also known as a bush type or dwarf type. An indeterminate vegetable is either a vining or pole type. Now, with the determinate or bush or dwarf vegetables, they usually will grow and give you a crop relatively quickly, very quickly in a month or two. They usually don't need to be caged or trellised because the plant growth is minimal. They don't get really big. They tend to need less space. And they also tend to, they're going to give you that bang for the buck very quickly. Indeterminate vegetables, or vining or pole type, often need to be staked, or they need room to grow. An indeterminate pumpkin plant can quickly take over a medium-sized garden. These plants tend to set a few fruit throughout the season. So you might pick a few tomatoes today, a couple tomatoes few days from now, throughout the season until the freeze ends your garden. So by the end of the season, they tend to have higher overall yields. But because they're indeterminate, they're in the field longer, overall, they are going to take more water to grow them compared to the determinate plants. So I touched on this before, but general water requirements, when we need to be applying these waters to these crops. So tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, the fruiting vegetables, we need water during that flowering and fruiting to prevent blossom end rot issues later on. Vine crops such as cucumbers, the vining indeterminate squash, melons, they also are going to get blossom end rot, other issues like that, abiotic issues, if we don't give them water during flowering and fruiting. Carrots, onions, and lettuce, consistent, even watering throughout the season. And sweet corn is one that is really a water hog, basically, in our gardens here. So it does need quite a bit of water. If you've tried growing sweet corn and had very sparse kernel set on those cobs, very likely it was because of drought stress. So there's other issues that will cause that, but usually in New Mexico gardens, they just didn't get enough water to properly grow in a healthy manner. So what are some great low water vegetables for our gardens? Some of these you may be very familiar with, maybe some you have not heard of or haven't tried growing. But I'm going to quickly touch on tepary beans, black-eyed peas, also known as cowpeas, okra, asparagus, and some varieties of squash are very, very drought tolerant. So tepary beans, this is a bean crop that is actually native to the American Southwest, and Native American tribes, way back in the day, would get tepary beans, after a big rainfall where an arroyo was very wet, they would plant these bean seed in there, and that would be all the water they would need to come back and harvest beans off them later in the season. So just that one really good rain, perhaps a couple other rains, helping to moisten that arroyo would give them a crop. There's a wide variety of beans. They're very tasty. They're smaller beans. They don't yield as big as many of the commercial varieties, but they're very well adapted to the desert Southwest. The Three Sisters Garden, I'm going to just discuss this concept with most of you probably already know the Three Sisters concept. This is the companion planting scenario where we take corn, beans, and squash and plant them together for the mutual benefit of all three crops. So the corn provides support for the bean vines. The bean as a legume is going to produce nitrogen that may benefit all the plants around it. And then the squash leaves, they're big, they cover the grounds, they provide a bit of a natural living mulch to help shade out the weeds. Now, here in the desert Southwest, however, the Native Americans once again developed the Zuni waffle garden concept. So this is a very similar concept to the Three Sisters garden, except this is for very arid conditions, water use efficiency, efficient growth. So what these are is these are 12-foot by 12-foot squares here. We have the corn plant in the middle, once again surrounded by the beans, a squash plant on either side of this, just like the Three Sisters. But these waffles are actually indented. So that corn plant is at the lowest point of these 12 by 12 squares or waffles. So that way, any moisture you get, any rainfall, it's going to come down there and really help provide that irrigation for the corn that is the most water thirsty of these three crops. So this does allow for maximum water efficiency, a Three Sisters scenario in an arid Southwest garden. So black-eyed peas, this is another very drought-tolerant crop. The immature beans can be eaten just like snap peas, or you can let them mature fully to harvest the peas inside. They're very large plants, so make sure you give them lots of room in your garden. They actually originated in Africa, and they need very, very little water for healthy growth. And in fact, the biggest problem we have is if you water them too much, that inhibits their growth. So they really like to be well dried out between watering, and they love the high heat. So the hot summer months here we have in New Mexico, where other types of bean crops really stop setting when it gets very hot, the cowpeas will do very well. Okra. So okra is one of my selections of best vegetables to grow in New Mexico. This is a member of the cotton family. This also comes originally from Africa. And of course, we're growing them for their immature seed pods. So keep in mind, the thing about okra is you got to harvest it when it's nice and succulent, very small pods. If they get very large at all, they quickly become woody and quite unpalatable. They are known for their slimy consistency. Many people don't like that, but I'm always reminded that it depends on how you cook it. So a lot of okra lovers out there as well. They really love the heat here in New Mexico. They like humidity, but they'll do fine with a little bit of supplemental watering. They do need to be well drained. So this is one, if you have very heavy clay soil, it may be harder to get that good drainage you need for optimum okra growth. And you want to plant these when the soil is warm. So after it's nice and hot, that's when we want to put these, direct seed these in New Mexico. Now another crop, this is probably definitely in my top 3 of crop suggestions, best crops to grow in New Mexico, and that's asparagus. So asparagus is a very deep-rooted perennial plant. So by perennial, it's like once you get this established in your garden, it's going to continue to produce for you for many, many years. Asparagus is very tolerant of heat, drought, and salinity, 3 conditions that we have in abundance here in New Mexico, and unfortunately for most vegetables, great for asparagus. Keep in mind that asparagus is a bit unusual in that it's dioecious. It has separate male and female plants. So typically growers will want to plant male plants because the male plants give you more spear production, they're higher yielding, and they don't produce the seed or the red berries. And because asparagus loves New Mexico so much, if you have a female asparagus plant producing these berries, the asparagus seed can quickly become a weed issue because anywhere there's enough moisture, those asparagus plants are going to establish and start growing. We have a lot of wild asparagus in New Mexico, and I'm often asked, was asparagus native to New Mexico? And it's not. It was introduced here by early settlers, but once asparagus was introduced to New Mexico, it found conditions that it just loved. So as soon as seed escaped, anywhere there was enough moisture to sustain it, you would get asparagus patches. And many folks who grew up in New Mexico remember the wild asparagus growing in the ditch banks around the state. This is actually an asparagus plant near the Rio Grande here in southern New Mexico. That it was a very, very dry dry year. And the asparagus plant there is one of the only really green things that you could see anywhere. So it was not really productive. When it's under that much drought stress, it's not going to give it a lot of spears to consume, but the plants persist. And I will say that because of weed control programs, a lot of the wild asparagus has been removed from ditch banks, which is kind of sad, but just means if you want to grow your own asparagus, have your own asparagus source, you have to do it yourself. So squash. So with squash, we have our summer squash, which is mainly the genus species. The species is pepo, zucchini, scallop, yellow crookneck. These squash, we eat the fruit when they're still immature. So the seed in that is not viable yet. They're still very tender and young. Of course, you can eat the blossoms. They're delicious. The winter squash, we have mainly three species of squash in the winter category, the maxima, pepo, and mochata. These include the pumpkins, acorns, and of course, with the winter squash, we actually let them mature till the seed inside is mature, the fruit are fully mature. That hard rind makes them good for storing. And usually you want to cure these, depending the type of variety is going to dictate what type of curing method, but they keep very well for a long period of time, without refrigeration or other food preservation techniques needed. So having said that, so our summer squash are in the pepo, and for our pumpkins, winter squash, ornamental squash, we can have them in the different species. And this does matter if you're trying to save seeds, otherwise it's not really consideration. I just want to talk about the different types of squash because we do have selections in each of these winter squash species, and one in the summer squash type that is more drought tolerant. So first of all, I'll bring up the very, very drought-tolerant winter squash, Seminole pumpkin. So this was actually cultivated by Native Americans in Florida. It's very, very large plants. The fruit, once they're fully mature, they have a very, very long shelf life. They have very, very deep roots. They're very, very drought tolerant and take relatively less irrigation to grow. One of my favorites, my sentimental favorites, because I love the flavor of it, is the red curry squash. This is in the Maxima group. It's also known as red baby Hubbard. It has a very thick skin, delicate, delicious flesh. Once again, this one has very, very deep roots, very drought tolerant, minimal irrigation to get a good crop off of this variety. So zucchini. So in general, our summer squashes are going to need more irrigation water than some of these winter squash selections. However, being aware of this issue, we've actually had breeders that have actually looked to develop some of the summer squash varieties that are more deep-rooted, more drought tolerant than some of the other commercial varieties. And in particular, I'm going to give a shout out to Dark Star. So this variety was specifically bred for drought tolerance by the breeders actually working, getting those very deep penetrating roots that can mine moisture from deep down into the soil. Tomato cultivars. So once again, some tomato cultivars are quite drought tolerant. This really depends on how deeply rooted they are. I did also mention the determinate. So if you just want to grow a determinate tomato variety that's going to give you a quick crop, that's one way to reduce the water requirements of your garden. Then we have others that are just, will produce very deep roots to get over the very dry, hot periods of the season. We knew pineapple, it's an heirloom, as is yellow pear, both very drought tolerant types. And in general, the cherry types like yellow pear, are just more robust here. They typically they're indeterminate though, but they do have very deep roots. They're very resistant to diseases that we have here in New Mexico, other production challenges. So cherry tomatoes are another great choice for New Mexico. Celebrity is a variety that's well beloved. Many people have grown Celebrity, and it has been touted as being more drought tolerant than some of the other tomato varieties available. Bush 506 Bush is another one. It's actually a determinate type, so relatively short period until you can actually harvest the fruit, a couple of months. And they're very, very drought tolerant plants compared to many other tomato varieties. And if you really want to go all the way out for drought tolerance of tomatoes, a good selection is the Punta Banda. So this actually originated from the Baja California Peninsula. It's a cherry type. It produces, hundreds of very, very small fruit, but it's very, very resistant to heat stress, water stress, and even poor soil conditions that you may have in your garden as you continue to build your soil year after year. I'll just give another quick shout out for a cucumber variety. So this is very closely related to the squash types, but the Beta Alpha cucumber, it's an heirloom that was actually developed and released. It's gynoecious, which basically means it mainly makes female flowers that don't need pollination. So it will spontaneously produce fruit even if you don't have male flowers to provide pollen. It's very early maturing, and you want to pick these fruit when they're very small, about 6 to 8 inches, and very productive, very tolerant to heat and drought compared to many of the other cucumber varieties. Now, just quickly, I'll mention, I know the water group here has many resources on this. Other ways that you could help with your vegetable garden. I didn't go into container vegetables today, and I actually did a container vegetable talk for the Ready, Set, Grow program at New Mexico State University a few weeks ago. I believe that's online if you want to access that. But collecting gray water, if you're doing a container vegetable garden, just collecting water in the shower while that water is heating can easily provide the irrigation requirements for a container of assorted vegetables. Rainwater harvesting, there's different laws in different parts of the country, but I believe here in Albuquerque, it's encouraged to actually set up the infrastructure to harvest your own rainwater. And once again, this is a great way to get irrigation water for your garden by collecting that in rain barrels and then using it through a soaker hose or drip irrigation, low pressure setup is an extremely efficient way to provide irrigation for your vegetable gardens. So there's a lot more resources in both of these areas, and each one, of course, is a whole talk in itself. So I'll just quickly mention that. So quickly in summary, the concepts that I've discussed today. Number one, really important. Our soil here is tough in New Mexico. It needs more organic matter. Organic matter is great to maintain that soil moisture right where the vegetable roots are, right where we need that soil moisture. So we don't have enough, so regularly incorporate organic matter into your garden soil. If you have deep-rooted plants in particular, applying water slowly and directly to the roots through soaker hoses, through drip irrigation is a great way to encourage very deep, robust root growth that will help with drought stress, prevent drought stress. Cover your bare ground with mulch. So plastic mulch will help preserve moisture. It will prevent a lot of weed growth, but it doesn't help build the soil. So using some of the organic mulch materials is a great way to both conserve moisture in the soil as well as improve your soil quality. Eliminate weeds. Okay, they're out there competing for both that water and the nutrients in the soil. So let's get those out of there. Modify the growing environment through windbreaks and shading. So during the hot parts of the summer here, plants have to take up water just to stay alive. So that's no longer giving you additional yield, additional fruit, additional benefits. So reducing some of that stress on your vegetable plants through these means is a great way to reduce water requirements of those plants. Also consider drought-tolerant vegetables. I mean, there are some out there that were really adapted to very dry, arid conditions, so they'll do great in your garden with minimal irrigation inputs. Use an efficient irrigation system. So remember, you can absolutely flood or sprinkle vegetables and they will do fine as long as they're getting enough water. It's a much less efficient, much more wasteful way of watering your vegetable gardens compared to drip irrigation or soaker hoses. And of course, take advantage of gray water and rainwater harvesting if your area, if your garden allows that. Pay attention to what the plants are using. Many gardeners tend to overwater vegetables, so look at the plants, watch for stress, dig down to the soil, see how that soil moisture feels where the roots are actively growing, and water accordingly. And of course, having said all of this, everyone's garden, whether it's a container or an acre-sized garden or more, it's going to be unique. Your soil is going to be unique. The salinity, the pH of the soil is going to be unique. So consider your situation and plan accordingly. And every county has at least one amazing extension agent. So if you don't know how to get started with a garden or how to test your soil, test your water quality, they can help get you on track with that. Okay, and that's it. I have a few minutes for questions. So thank you all very much for your attention. And I'm really thrilled with all the excitement about a talk on growing vegetables because, yeah, growing your own vegetables, it's a great, healthful hobby. And everyone who can do it should do it. Thank you.